Though he was desperate not to do this, Soviétia called in his servants and secretaries and gave them an order. I need a lady-in-waiting to serve Rashta. You all must have female relatives. I want each of you to recommend 2 people for me. The emperor's concubine was in an odd position as both the subject of much attention and envy as well as criticism and contempt. Soviétia thought that Rashta's status as a commoner must have hurt the noble's pride. For this reason, some emperors married their concubine to another aristocrat to forge a noble identity, but there was too much talk about Rashta to conceal her background. For a month or a year, the nobles would only pretend to be friendly to Rashta so long as Soviétia continued to care for her. Because no one would volunteer, he had no choice but to give an order. She needs to have a peer, so be mindful about the age difference. The servants and secretaries exchanged awkward glances among themselves. You're talking about this runaway slave? Are you crazy, father? How can you say that to mother? Baron Lance's hands were trembling and sweating profusely. Runaway slave? No, she's not a runaway slave. She's a commoner. Even if she's not a runaway slave, it's still a problem because everyone thinks so. Baroness Lant put her hands on her hips and glared at her husband. You want me to serve a runaway slave? People will laugh at you and our jests as well as me. The Baron Lant is below a slave. Baron Lant believed that Rashta was a charming and lovely woman, and that one day other nobles would fall for the new concubine. But that was the future, and it's clear that people in society today had a bad opinion of Rashta. Unfortunately, what Baroness Lant said was true. What about on your side? Your niece Acey are suggesting we decide her future for her because she isn't your niece. Even among your extended family there are at least 3 nieces. No, you don't know their personalities. They aren't just someone you can put into another person's care. Oh my, see this? What's the excuse now? As the Baron and Baroness Lant argued with each other, the other servants and secretaries found themselves in similar circumstances. Everyone shook their heads while talking about the runaway slave. However, they weren't in the position to back down like the Empress in the end. Count Pernu and Baron Lant were ordered by the Emperor to bring their female relatives to the palace for a month. I thought Soviétia would force me to inquire the noblewomen again, but somehow 3 days later, my ladies-in-waiting informed me that Count Pernu's daughter and a Baron Lant's distant relative would serve as Rashta's companions. Setting aside Baron Lant's relative, it was surprising that Count Pernu's daughter would take on the job. Isn't that young lady's name Helen? I knew that the Pernu family was a strong household. Yes, your majesty, yet Helen somehow was the lady-in-waiting. Helen is inquisitive, and has a good relationship with her father. Maybe she's here for the Count's sake, I suppose, so I nodded and did not bring it up anymore. Fortunately, a few hours later, I completely forgot about Rashta when I went for a walk and found the handsome bird once again. The ladies-in-waiting were amazed when the bird flew and hovered before me. Oh, the bird's here again, see how it goes to the Empress. Amazing. The bird had another note on its leg, but I'm smarter than a bird. I'm sobering up now. I chuckled as I read the note. It was for no big reason in particular. I just laughed. I watered the bird, then quickly wrote a reply. Looks like you're not fully sober yet. What's the bird's name? The ladies giggled again after seeing my note. Everyone mused on whether it was fun to write such letters. I kissed the bird's small head and launched it into the sky, and it flapped its wings and flew away. This time I ended the letter with a question. Would the person who received the letter reply to me again? I like to think so. The name I temporarily forgot about arrived back in my ears not long after. Empress, I've come to ask you something about Rashta. I was busy discussing the New Year's preparations with the Minister of Finance when Soviétia brought her up. Is it urgent? I glanced at my watch as if I had already finished my work day. If it was not urgent, we could talk later. There was no rush about Rashta. Instead of replying to me, Soviétia looked at the minister, who stood up awkwardly from his seat and walked away. All the other officials followed suit in a moment. Only the 2 of us were left in the room. What's going on? Soviétia looked at me beyond the large table as I said, it's about Rashta. Please, couldn't he solve the concubine's problems on his own? I nodded, pressing down the words in my throat. All right, did you spread rumors that Rashta is a runaway slave? That story again. Except he was more specific than before. Last time he only asked if I said something strange. I looked at him in trepidation. Not only do Rashta's new ladies-in-waiting do not treat her properly, but they also don't act as ladies-in-waiting at all. Your Majesty, I don't want to be involved in any way with your concubine, but why do they ignore Rashta at every turn, and compare everything she does to the Empress? Poor Rashta hid it, and didn't say a word to me. If I hadn't seen the ladies-in-waiting behavior by accident, I wouldn't have known it was happening. Shouldn't we ask the ladies-in-waiting? I asked, and they said they didn't want to serve a runaway slave. You are truly unreasonable. In the end, I could not tolerate it any more, and spoke my mind. Soviétia stared at me in amazement. My eyes were hot with unshed tears, but I bit my tongue to hold them back. The empress should not cry as a matter of pride. They said they heard rumors, not that I said them. Are you blaming me for rumors for which you don't know the source? No matter how much I think about it, there isn't anyone else but you who could benefit from it. What would I gain? Rashta is like a romantic rival to you, is she not? Wasn't it you who told me the story of Rashta being a runaway slave? You never said a word about the source of the rumor. Then I didn't know before, but it could have been you from the beginning. Soviétia's accusation was one-sided and insulting. I managed to steady my breath and keep my composure. But the more I tried to keep calm, the more suspicious Soviétia seemed to be of me. It took a moment, but finally I managed to force out a voice that sounded normal. Your concubine is not a rival to me. What, you are not my lover, so how can she be a threat to me? Soviétia's expression wavered. I straightened my back and gave him a smile practiced hundreds of times in front of a mirror. The concubine is precious to you, while I am just like everyone else. I am tiring of this, so let me say it again. Your Majesty, don't get me involved with you and your concubine. I whirled around and saw myself through the door. The finance minister was nervously pacing down the hallway, and he turned his head in my direction. His eyes widened when his gaze fell upon me. It was obvious that I couldn't manage my facial expressions. I smiled at him, then quickly left the hallway and made to the western grounds. I ran to my secluded nest chair where there were no ladies-in-waiting and buried myself inside. I hugged my body and stifled my sobs as best I could. The empress does not cry. She does not cry in front of others. In my head, Soviétia and his concubine were so small and unimportant that they could not shake me, but in my heart there was a hole. Eventually it turned dark. I stayed cocooned in my chair for a long time. I was sure that my ladies-in-waiting were searching for me, and I slowly unfolded my body. After sitting curled in one position for hours, my arms and legs were as stiff as a wooden doll. Then there was a piercing shriek from afar. I looked up from my nest chair and saw a large bird coming down from the sky. It was the handsome bird, the one that brought the note from the drunken foreigner. It headed for me again, then landed in my lap and peered at me up close. It looked so adorable that I burst into giggles, and the bird blinked its large eyes and tilted its head. You came to see me again. A note was tied to the bird's leg. I unfurled the note and saw written in neat script, "Does it need a name? You can give it one if necessary." I studied the bird, and the bird looked back at me. Its gaze felt more penetrating than usual. Did it know that I was feeling depressed? Bird, I looked into its bright eyes and almost believed that it understood me. No, that was foolish, but intelligent birds could understand people right. I hesitated for a moment, looked around, then hugged the bird and whispered to its feathery head, "This is my secret place." The bird shifted and gave me a blank look. I petted the bird's back and continued again awkwardly, "There's nowhere I can cry. But here I can cry to my heart's content. It's a secret, so don't tell anyone else." The bird blinked its large eyes again, then it slowly lifted a wing and brushed it against my cheek as if to comfort me, and I smiled. "Nice bird." I kissed its head in gratitude, and the bird made a funny squawking noise and tapped the note with its beak. Did it want to reply? It was a really clever creature. Fortunately, I carried notepaper and a pocket pen with me. I took them out, meditated on the right name for the bird, and wrote it down. The bird's name is Queen. When I finished the note, I looked up to see the bird staring at my writing as if it could read the letters. The bird tapped the word Queen with a large claw. "That's your name if you could give this to your master." I tied the note to the bird's leg, then gently hugged it again. The empress, yes, no matter what happened, I was the empress. No matter what Soviétia said, the concubine was the concubine, and the empress was the empress. I pulled out a handkerchief, patted the swollen area around my eyes, and took a breath. Remember what my mother said, I shouldn't get involved with them. People don't expect me to be an empress that is loved by the emperor. My goal in life is not to be loved by the emperor either. I had learned and lived to be the most perfect empress. I was human and I would be hurt. But I couldn't sink into despair. I already had enough pity for myself. Now I had to get up. I drew my breath, kissed the bird's head again, and let it fly into the sky. The bird seemed unwilling to part with me for a moment, and circled once over my head, but it finally turned away and flew far away. I practiced my smile once more, then returned to the palace. The large bird flew straight to a nearby mountain. It skimmed the trees until it found a suitable outcrop, which was already occupied with a flock of birds, and landed there. The appearance of the large bird sent the other smaller birds scattering, and the large bird perched itself on a rock in the open space. Then incredibly the bird transformed into a young man. He was handsome, extremely so, and his entire body was finely proportioned and shaped with well-defined muscles, calling a male queen. The young man grumbled to himself and scratched his head. A bluebird, which was sitting on a nearby tree, hopped down and also transformed into a man, this time with blue hair. The blue-haired man pulled a blue cape from another tree and started to scold the other. "What do you mean? You said you were going to scout. You didn't go anywhere else, did you?" "Oh no, I've been scouting for beauties." "What are you talking about?" "I went to the palace." "The palace? Are you sure?" The handsome young man grimaced when the blue-haired man stared at him distrustfully. "You don't believe me?" The blue-haired man swung the brown cape around the young man's shoulders. "That will never happen. But please pay attention to your actions, Your Highness. Remember that you are the heir to the Western Kingdom. It seemed that I dropped my handkerchief when I pulled out my pen yesterday. I searched all over my room, but I couldn't find the handkerchief I usually carried with me. I went to work as usual at the Central Palace, then headed to the Western Garden during lunch. It's alright, the Empress won't be here at this time." "Does the Empress really own the entire palace?" "Only the Empress' bedroom is hers. The Empress often visits here too, so why not Miss Rashta as well?" I heard laughter and conversation as I approached my nest chair, and I stopped right before the bushes to observe what was happening. Rasta was sitting in my nest chair while a maidservant pushed it like a swing. The other maid had brought a table and was even cutting fruit. Hot anger seared through my chest. Did the concubine still not know that the Western Palace was the domain of the Empress? No, she must know. If she was avoiding me, I could barely tolerate the fact that someone I didn't like was enjoying themselves in my chair. Well, the Empress would never come to such a small place. If Rashta doesn't sit in it, the chair will be lonely, right? "Miss Rashta, you adorable little thing, you are so different from the other young ladies. You are so innocent." "Why, what about the others?" "Well, nobles make their debut in society at the age of 17. After that they need to be cunning. There's a lot of fighting and backstabbing involved. Miss Rashta, don't get involved with them, or they'll eat you alive." Rashta smiled, then turned and suddenly caught sight of me. "Your Majesty." Rashta jumped to her feet. The maids, who had been speaking ill of the nobility, also stepped back in surprise. Two new ladies-in-waiting were nowhere to be seen. Supposedly they did not get along with Rashta, and they must have been sent back by Sovieshu or the maids. I pushed aside a few stems and approached them, my eyes fixed on the nest chair. When Rashta stood up, I spotted my handkerchief behind her dress. She had used the handkerchief to sit on my nest chair. When Rashta saw the direction of my gaze, she spoke up hurriedly. "This isn't trash, Your Majesty. It's very beautiful." "I know the chair is not trash, it's my chair." Rashta flinched at my clipped tone. I counted to the number 10 in the old language. That chair was my cherished possession, and this was my secret place. I was angry that Sovieshu's concubine invaded my precious spot. "Your Majesty, why do you look so frightening?" Rashta's voice was short on breath, but I couldn't open my mouth to reply. It was not forbidden for anyone else to be here. While I never saw other people with my own eyes, anyone else could have used this chair, and yet anger flared in my chest at the thought of Rashta using it. Concubines were not supposed to come here to the Western Palace to see the Empress. However, it was unbecoming for an Empress to take offense for someone sitting in a chair, and those maids would certainly gossip about the nobles like they did before. I managed to steady my breathing and repeated to myself to never get angry in any way. "Your Majesty, the handkerchief you are sitting on is mine too." As I managed to force my anger down, Rashta turned back quickly in surprise. The maids glanced at each other and bowed their heads. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Rashta didn't know it was just by the chair. You did it without knowing, but don't come to the West Palace anymore. It's not good that we see each other, but Rashta wants to be friends with Her Majesty." Rashta was in tears and the maids looked on in pity. They probably already thought I was a mean woman who was offended over a chair or handkerchief. Seeing Rashta so upset, I deliberately smiled and said something to shock her. "You can be friends with the next concubine. The next concubine that the Emperor will bring in after you." I only returned what she said to me. Rashta turned pale and looked at me with a wounded expression. She bowed her head and ran away, and her maids chased after her. I stood alone and gazed at my nest chair and my crushed handkerchief. I didn't feel good. It was the same chair and handkerchief that I had before, but I found no cheer in them. Your Majesty, Sovieshu found himself surprised when he visited Rashta after work. As soon as he entered the room, a sobbing Rashta leapt into his arms. What's wrong? Why are you crying? Did a lady-in-waiting insult you again? Your Majesty, when you get tired of Rashta, will you bring another woman as your concubine? What? Who said that? He stared at her dumbfounded, and she cried out, the Empress. The Empress. Sovieshu frowned as if he found it difficult to believe. Why would the Empress suddenly say that to you? No. Where did you meet her? There is an abandoned chair in the West Palace garden. No one was using it, so Rashta was playing there. Did you go to the West Palace again? I went when the Empress wasn't there. And it was at the secluded garden, not near the building. Your Majesty. Tears poured down Rashta's face in rivulets, and Sovieshu sighed and wiped them away with his sleeve. So you were sitting in a chair that no one was using and you were avoiding the Empress? I don't know. She had a scary face, and Rashta said, I want to be friends with the Empress. And she insinuated that I would bring another concubine when I tired of you? She didn't say that exactly, but she meant it. Is that really true? Will you love another woman besides Rashta? Your Majesty, are you going to cheat on Rashta? That's not possible. Are you sure you're not the kind of man to cheat? Rashta stared widely at him with her doe eyes, and Sovieshu hugged her tightly and repeated his answer. Her trembling finally calmed down. Sovieshu rubbed Rashta's back, frowning. I returned to my palace after finishing my work, then slipped into comfortable clothes more quickly than usual. I felt my head throbbing, possibly because of the constant feeling of something bothering me. I was slowly starting to understand my mother's words of do not get involved in the affairs of the Emperor and his concubine. But mother, even if I try not to care, she keeps appearing in front of me. Countess Eliza. Yes, Your Majesty. About my mother? No, never mind. You want me to bring Duchess Trovi? No, it's all right. I'll see her on New Year's anyway. You should consult the Duchess if you're feeling uneasy. Your Majesty, counsel would probably ease my mind, but if I spoke to her, my mother's mind would be a thorny path from then on, and I didn't want to burden her with my problems. She already thought about me all the time. I'll keep it to myself for now. I can tell her later. Mother must have heard about Rashta anyway. I will. Is Lady Laura all right? Yes, she wants to return to the palace as soon as possible. Tell her she can come back whenever he wants, preferably before New Year's. That way people won't talk. Yes, Your Majesty. Talking about Laura made me miss her bright energy. The Countess left the room for a moment, and I unpinned the jewels from my hair and placed them on the dresser. I'm going to go to bed a little early today. I should skip dinner instead. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. There was the click of the door behind me, but I didn't turn around, thinking it was the Countess. However, the presence stood silent behind my back. That was not what the Countess would do. As I was dipping my pen into the inkwell, I frowned and turned around. Your Majesty. To my surprise, it was Sovieshu standing behind me. How long had it been since my husband came to the Western Palace? Rather than being happy at his presence, I looked on anxiously. It was sure to be another difficult conversation with him. May I help you, Your Majesty? Why do people change so much? Of course, it was going to be another uncomfortable encounter. I had a terrible feeling and wondered if it had anything to do with Sovieshu in my room. Change? I heard about the bad things you said to Rashta. Rashta, a mere small woman. But her name and presence stuck stubbornly to my feet wherever I went. What did I say? You said that I would take another concubine after her. Rather than trying to be friendly to me, I told her to be friendly with another concubine when she comes. Did I say something wrong? She spoke without malice. Must you act so cynical? I've changed. You've changed, Empress. How many times do I have to repeat that I don't want to get involved with you and your concubine? Yet it does not stop me from hearing about her. If you and Miss Rashta left me be, I wouldn't be so cynical. I had to come because it was necessary. If you hadn't said those things to Rashta, I wouldn't have come here. I shouted, not from excitement, but from finding something that would hurt Sovieshu the most. Did the former emperor ever talk about Countess Sophie to the former empress? Sovieshu paled when I brought up the subject of the former emperor's favored lover. I didn't know you were such a gossiper. He gestured his arms around the room. This room is full of beautiful furniture, and you can buy anything you want. You are cruel to someone who has lived their life pitifully. Sovieshu's eyes filled with disappointment. She was also a subject of the Empress before she was my concubine. Do you not feel sorry for her? Yes. As soon as I said that single word, my legs became weak. I hold on to the dressing table to prevent my legs from folding underneath myself, and that was when Countess Eliza came in the room and rushed towards me. She carefully hugged me and comforted me in her arms. Really, the Emperor was angry with the Empress because of Rashta, I think, so they were shouting at the top of their voices. Charlie gave a bitter smile, and Rashta covered her face with both her hands while the Emperor is incredible. The other maid, Kisa, continued the story. Not only that, but he declared a strict punishment to anyone who brings up the false rumor that you're a runaway slave. The faces of the two maids blurred behind Rashta's tears. The Emperor really loves you, Miss Rashta. Yes, well, how could anyone not love someone so beautiful and innocent? The Emperor and Rashta are like lovers in fairy tales. It really is like a fairy tale. Rashta bowed her head and wiggled her toes shyly. Rashta is so happy these days. I feel like I'm dreaming every day. She was not prepared when a moment later, 3 servants entered the room to deliver a large swing chair. His mood grew even brighter. This is a gift from the Emperor to Rashta. He said you can sit here without going to the palace. Unlike the nest chair in the Western Palace, the fixture and decorations of this chair were all made of jewels, gold, and silver. The cushions and feather-stuffed cushions were made of the finest material and heavenly soft. Rashta burst into tears of joy and exchanged happy looks with her maids. I lay crying in bed when I heard a tap on my window. I looked up dully, and to my surprise I saw the handsome bird hovering outside. I hesitated before opening the window, and the bird hopped onto my bed, picked its wings, and stared at me. You arrived quickly this time. I wiped away my tears, and the bird peered at me with its large eyes like it had seen me crying. It was such a clever bird. Is your master near? The bird nodded, as if it understood my words. I lifted the bird and placed it on my lap, and it froze for a moment, and blinked rapidly. I brushed its head, then pulled the note from its leg. The bird will be named Queen, but keep in mind that he is a male. It was a short but efficient sentence again. The heaviness in my mind lifted, and I smiled at the words of this stranger who I had neither face nor name for. You're a boy. The bird flapped his wings as if miffed by my ignorance, but in my defense, I didn't know the difference between the males and females of this species. I patted his head again, then went to my desk, and the bird followed. I took out a sheet of paper and wrote a reply. I didn't know he was male. An unexpected surprise. I rolled up the note and tied it to the bird's leg, then glanced at the calendar. The New Year's celebrations were just around the corner. Some of the guests would start arriving early tomorrow at the palace. The owner of the bird was already nearby. Would they come tomorrow? The next morning the Lord and Lady of the Lux region arrived, as well as other distinguished guests from the neighboring countries. The guests' reception were divided for either me, Sovietshu, or the foreign minister. Most of the time they went to Sovietshu. Your Majesty, there is an arrival from the Western Kingdom. If it's the Western Kingdom, yes, I believe it's Prince Heinrich. The prince was one of the few guests I had to personally greet. I nodded and stood up, and the officials supervising the guest list followed suit. I gestured to them to sit down, then walked towards a large mirror, arranged my dress, and went to the reception room. Prince Heinrich was the younger brother of the King of the West, and the second son of their father. However, Heinrich was the heir to the throne, as the king had no children. Despite already having a queen and 3 official concubines, rumors abounded that because of the king's infertility and poor physical condition these days, Prince Heinrich would likely inherit the throne. In spite of that, the Western Kingdom was already similar in size and power to the Eastern Empire. Of course I would go and welcome the special guest myself. I entered the White Rose Room, and when I looked at the delegation I stopped breathing when I saw the man at the head. I had often heard rumors about this man's beautiful appearance. As soon as one entered into high society, one could not escape talk of Prince Heinrich. Word was that he was a womanizer. He had a violent personality. He was indescribably handsome. He killed or backstabbed people with a smile on his face. Or that it wasn't that the king of the Western Kingdom was incapable of having children, but that the prince killed each of them. I could not decipher from all the rumors whether Prince Heinrich was a womanizer or a cruel person. But one thing was certain: his appearance. He really was beautiful. His blonde hair fell into soft tousled waves on his face, and his lips curved into a delicate bow. He bore a strong neck and broad shoulders, but what was most striking about him were his mysterious violet eyes. Even if he were to stand in the corner with his mouth shut, he would stir all kinds of rumors. I stood opposite of Prince Heinrich, admiring him as surreptitiously as I could. He was only a prince, but he was from the esteemed Western Kingdom, and so I treated him with the respect of a crown prince. I stood across from him, but before I could say anything, Prince Heinlein bent one knee and reached out his hand like a knight swearing a vow of loyalty. I gave him my hand, upon which he placed a gentle kiss, but the difference between the knights was clear. The knights lowered their eyes or stared towards the front as they gave a kiss of loyalty. This man, however, stared straight into my eyes and held my gaze captive. "It's an honor to meet you, Empress." He released my hand and smiled, and I felt my stomach knot for some reason. I thought the rumor that he was cruel was more true than the one of him being a womanizer, as I saw no lechery in his eyes. Instead, he was like an eagle observing me from above, despite the fact that he was kneeling before me. "It's an honor to meet you as well, Prince Heinlein." I wouldn't let myself be crushed by him, of course. I wore a dignified expression born through years of training. He smiled softly, and rose to his knees. "It must have been a difficult journey, and I hope you will rest and enjoy it here until New Year's Day. I've always heard praise for the Imperial Palace of the Eastern Empire. It's very beautiful. I hope you will find it pleasing." The prince's eyes squinted in a smile at the ceremonial greeting. "I am already pleased. The amount of work required from me was halved after the arrival of the special guests, and most of what was left was for the celebrations themselves. I finished my work earlier than usual and returned to the Western Palace." Laura, who returned to her position as my lady-in-waiting, quickly approached me. Your Majesty, how was he? How was Prince Heinlein? Is he beautiful like the rumors say?" The other ladies-in-waiting approached in interest, teacups in hand. They set them down in various corners like the window frame on the dresser on the tea table, then went to work in helping me change. "I heard that the Grand Duke Crome fainted when he saw Prince Heinlein. Is that really true?" "I heard a famous theater actress went on a date with him once, then chased him for 3 years. Although the ladies-in-waiting would see him in a few days, they could not bear their patience," I replied to satiate their craving, remembering Prince Heinlein's steady gaze, purple eyes, and sharp charisma that could be felt from a distance. "He was the most beautiful person I've ever seen, without a doubt." Laura let out a small scream of exclamation. "Wow, I can't wait to see him." What was his voice like? It's the best voice I've ever heard. It was not an exaggeration. The ladies put their hands on their hearts while swooning. "I'm already looking forward to what gossip the handsome prince will bring. I'm sure many are already thinking about it." While they were curious about Prince Heinlein's appearance, they were also looking forward to the drama he would bring. I smiled as I listened to their conversation when there was a tap on the window. It was Queen rapping the glass with his beak. "Are you here already?" I opened the window and he landed on the sill and blinked at me. Now that I thought about it, Queen also had gold feathers and purple eyes. It was hard to imagine that he could survive in the wild with such conspicuous colors. Suddenly I worried if it was alright to use a bird like this as a messenger. Queen held out his foot as if he wanted me to read the note as soon as possible. I opened the note and sat at my desk while the ladies-in-waiting occupied themselves in feeding Queen. The handwriting was familiar, the message playful. "I arrived at the Imperial Palace. Do you know who I am?" He was already here. The guests started entering the palace today. I mentally filed through all the arrivals. It was difficult to pinpoint one person from the abundance of guests. There were Grand Duke Crome and his wife, the Grand Duke Liltiang the Chancellor and his family from the Northern Kingdom, the children of Duchess Cranthea from Samino, Prince Heinlein from the Western Kingdom, Emperor Sirim of Blue Bohemian. The problem was that they did not come in 2s or 3s, just from the Grand Duke and his wife. There were also the knights, the servants and escorts, and then multiply that number by several times to account for the other guests. I didn't know if the letter came from a woman or man, if they were young or old, or what status they were. It was almost impossible to determine. "Queen's owner, I don't know who you are." I considered it a little more and then added, "Do you know who I am?" I was sure they didn't know I was one of countless people living in the palace. As soon as I finished writing the letter, Queen hopped to my side. "This birdie is quite clever, Your Majesty," even while cleaning his feathers. "He seems to be trying to make eye contact with you, Your Majesty." The ladies-in-waiting burst out laughing when Queen butted his head towards me. "Really?" I stroked the bird's head and he made a pleased sound and half closed his eyes. I rolled up the note and tied it to the bird's leg, and he fluttered his wings and landed on the bed in a small dance before leaping back out the window. What a clever bird! The owner themselves would have to be quite intelligent to raise a bird like that. What kind of person were they? A young woman of my age like Laura, an elegant old lady, or gentleman, A prodigal nobleman, a knight who knows nothing but the sword. Do you like birds, your majesty? Countess Eliza came by my side as I stared silently outside the window. Yes, I think they're lovely. The bird was truly incredible. The person who owned the bird had to be incredible as well. Countess Eliza smiled and spoke in a half-encouraging tone. Then why don't you raise 1 or 2 birds of that species or any other species? Oh yes, it would be amazing to have a chick from birth. Let's bring them together. It was tempting, but I thought about it for a moment, and shook my head. No, seeing one is different from raising one. Queen was exceptionally intelligent because of his master's training. It was unclear whether I liked birds or just Queen himself. If I had an animal, I would make sure I would commit to it before raising it. I haven't seen Viscountess Verdi since yesterday. She had to rush back to her estate troubles again. The ladies-in-waiting glanced at each other. Unlike the rest of them, Viscountess Verdi had no mansion in the capital, and she frequently returned to her estate due to family matters. The problem was that most of the family matters was often unenjoyable news. I heard the son was gambling abroad, and the Viscount was with a married commoner woman, and the woman's husband sued. Many aristocrats were like this. Viscountess Verdi's son had a gambling problem, and the husband had a woman problem. Yes, Viscountess Verdi was certainly burdened with hardship. I was worried, but I couldn't interfere without her asking me. My consideration would touch her pride, and even if she asked for help, it's not something that I could resolve. Everyone has problems. I sighed and reached out to close the open window. The next day more guests arrived at the palace, starting with the arrival of the Princess of the Southern Kingdom early in the morning. The time passed quickly as I exchanged greetings with her, and her security was cleared. Maybe it was because of the rain, but today felt particularly hectic. It wasn't until I retired to my room in the evening that I found Queen sitting on the window frame, pining pitifully as he waited for me. I opened the window, and he crept into the room soaking wet and shuddering. My goodness, your master sent you in that rain. You're shaking. I'm sure you have a message. With my tongue in my cheek in concentration, I wrapped a soft towel around his body and gently dried his feathers. Queen hesitated for a moment, but soon started dozing in my hands. I rubbed him with the towel until he was completely dry, and carefully pulled the note from his leg. The handwriting was smudged by the rain, but this was what it said. Then shall we make a bet? The one who finds the other wins. What was it that I wrote before? I asked the sender who they were. They wanted to make a bet. I went to the desk and wrote a reply. What would you bet on? After I finished, I looked at Queen and back out the window again. The rain was still lashing heavily against the glass, and had been going on for hours. If I sent him out now, wouldn't he catch a cold? Queen was staring at me. Instead of playing with the towel, I put down my pen, and he tilted his head and flew over to the desk. He seemed to scan the contents of the note, then extended his leg as if he wanted me to tie the note. No, it's raining now. If I send you now, you will catch a cold. The bird hesitated, as if it really understood me, and I drew him in my arms and patted its head. You can sleep with me today. You can go when the rain stops. Come to think of it, he was a male bird. Did a bird consider a human's gender? Why was he suddenly frozen? I took a bath, then slipped into a gown, and when I returned to my room I found Queen lying on my bed. I was going to make a separate cushion for him to sleep next to me, but he was flat on his back. Could a bird sleep on its back like that? Cute. When I got closer, I marveled even more when I saw that he breathed with his beak slightly parted. He didn't wake up even after I touched him lightly, so I lay myself on the bed next to him. I kept still, feeling a warmth by my shoulders, maybe because Queen's body temperature was high even though he was a little far away. As I stared at him in wonder, Queen opened his eyes when I saw the purple of his irises. I was somehow reminded of Prince Heinrich. Come to think of it, the prince also had eyes like an eagle. I reached out and swept the bird's cheek, and his sharply gleaming eyes soon slid close again. You're so pretty, Queen, I spoke in a soft whisper, and the bird stretched its body from wingtip to feet, then covered my arm with its wing. Good night, Queen. I woke the next day and saw Queen was gone. The window was slightly ajar, as if he had let itself out. What a smart bird! Even more impressively, he remembered to take the note from my desk. Countess Eliza, did you clear the paper from my desk? I asked Countess Eliza, just in case. No, your majesty. Is it gone? Yes, I think Queen must have taken it. Countess Eliza was also impressed with my story. I thought about the bet as I made my way to the central palace. Queen was quite intelligent, so his owner had to be as well. Perhaps it was Emperor Sirim from Blue Bohemian. I heard he was quite smart. Moreover, as Blue Bohemian was a maritime country, it used messenger birds the most compared to other countries. Your face looks brighter, your majesty, is that so? Yes, I've been worried about your dark moods, but I'm glad the New Year's celebration seemed to cheer you. Your majesty, I see more precisely it was Queen's presence that lifted my mood, but if it weren't for New Year's, he never would have come to me. Countess Eliza was right. In the end I worked on my papers with a smile, and as soon as it was lunchtime, I returned to the Western Palace. I usually took my meals at the Central Palace, but I was worried that Queen would be waiting for me outside the window like yesterday. Again Queen was sitting outside the window again. Fortunately the weather was clear, and he was half dozing off in the sunshine, instead of shivering in the rain. When I opened the window, Queen quickly came into the room and held out his leg. I pulled out the note and checked it eagerly, and once again saw the familiar handwriting. I'll bet Queen. I looked at Queen. The bird blinked his large eyes and tilted his head, oblivious to the contents of the letter. Goo, your master wants to offer you, Queen. As soon as I spoke, Queen jumped and flapped his wings. I pulled Queen into my arms and placed him in my lap and looked down at his magnificent golden plumage. I wanted to have Queen. I have never seen such a cute, smart, and lovely bird before, but no matter what anyone else said, it was best if he stayed with his master. It would be heartbreaking if I won the bet and Queen was let go. No, that was not the best way to describe it. Queen would be abandoned by his master. I was not so happy with the competition either. I was curious, of course, but worry stopped me. The reason Queen's owner and I could send messages to each other was because we were strangers. Would we be able to talk in this familiar way even after we have discovered each other's identity? I had to be careful to preserve the dignity of my pose as empress, or else this comfortable atmosphere would disappear. Goo, the bird tapped my hand as I sat still, as if he were impatient for me to start writing. I hesitated and took Queen to my desk. I set him down, took out a piece of paper, and wrote a lie. Hint, I'm a man. Queen squawked and flapped his wings as soon as he saw my message. It sounded like he was laughing, and I felt embarrassed even though he was just a bird. I scratched his cheek, and Queen turned round and rubbed his head against my wrist. Do you think it's fun to lie to your master? I was glad he was having fun. I felt sorry for Queen's master. But they won't find me if I wrote this lie. That way we wouldn't be able to find each other, and we could remain faceless friends like now. You like this too, don't you, Queen? It was the day before the New Year's celebrations officially began. I greeted the last-minute arrivals and checked on the New Year's proceedings and the special banquet for the last day. I went to the Western Palace again during lunch hour to see if Queen was there today, but the effort was fruitless. Instead, Viscountess Verdi, who had been away for several days, returned. She still looked quite pale and distressed, but she greeted me. If it's no trouble to you, your majesty, it's all right. Tell me, can I borrow some money? The red-faced Viscountess Verdi could not even explain the reason she needed it. About 5,000 crowns. The other ladies in waiting, and I knew, though, however. Perhaps it was for her son or husband. Though Viscountess had hurried back to her estate, she could not pull her family out of the mire. I promised to lend her the money without prying any further, and she repeatedly said she would pay me back and left the room shamefaced. I'd rather get divorced. Laura was unmarried and didn't have much sympathy towards Viscountess Verdi. That's as good as throwing away the Lux army. Countess Eliza was patient in explaining this to Laura, but the young lady still didn't seem to understand. But even if she went through divorce, wouldn't her child be considered illegitimate? While it won't happen immediately, there is the possibility that he'll lose the right to inheritance. That's why she's enduring. Laura, so what if a troublemaker like him becomes heir? He'll only end up sucking his family dry. Hush, Laura. Countess Eliza glared at Laura and she pouted her lips. I'm only worried. Viscountess Verdi returned to her estate again, but not everyone could eat comfortably. As soon as I finished my lunch, I quickly returned to the Central Palace. Near the end of my work-day, something happened as I was taking a break. Your Majesty, one of the knights came inside my office and gave me an unexpected report. Prince Heinlein wants to see you. Prince Heinlein? Why him? I went outside and found him looking at a mural with his back to me. Your Majesty. I approached him and he turned his head and bowed like a knight again. I hope I am not too rude? Not at all. What can I do for you? I was told you would be finished with work around this time. Are you still busy? Did he find out my working hours? He was right though, and I replied that I was almost done, and he grinned. That's great. If you don't mind, could you show me the palace? I'd like to look around. But it's so enormous that I'm afraid I'll get lost. Then my lady-in-waiting. I was about to give him one of my ladies-in-waiting, but he interrupted me in a low voice. I wish for the Queen to do it. His voice was soft and sweet, but there was a note of self-important pride in it, and he had called me queen. He was not the only foreigner to do so, but the word felt strange as I had been sending messages with Queen the bird. Did that mean Prince Heinleigh was Queen's owner? Did he think I was his letter acquaintance? I had a moment of suspicion, but soon dismissed it. It didn't matter if he wrote those letters. I had no intention of meeting Queen's owner in real life. The knight standing next to me frowned as if offended. He seemed to think that it was rude for the prince to ask me to guide him around the palace. All right, nevertheless, there was no knowing when his country would surpass the Eastern Empire. I would not stir up unnecessary trouble with a prince who might succeed to the throne in the future. After a moment's thought, the proud attitude on the Prince Heinleigh's face vanished, replaced with an innocent smile as he offered his arm to me. I took it, and contrary to his beautiful and fine appearance, his arm felt densely muscled. I let go of it in surprise, and he looked at me curiously. What is it? Nothing. I couldn't very well say that. He was more solid than I expected, so I quickly looked away. Have you ever been to the Silver Garden? It's the closest garden to the Southern Palace. It's very beautiful. I've been around the Southern Palace. Naturally, I pondered for a moment, as we walked along the corridor exiting the Central Palace. The Central Palace was primarily used for work, with many forbidden areas to outsiders, so it was inappropriate for me to show him around there. The Southern Palace was used to house the foreign guests, and he must have toured around the area. Then there was still the Western Palace. We could share a cup of tea. So the Western Palace should be at the end. I could escort him to the Emperor's Eastern Palace, but I was reluctant to run across Rashta. We could easily skip that and go to the North Palace. Your Majesty, I was strolling forward without saying a word, and Prince Heinleigh called out me. Something in his voice made my ears tingle. I was thinking about what to show you first. Then I want to go. Before Prince Heinleigh finished speaking, a familiar person ran towards us from the garden bushes. Your Majesty, Rashta. Despite my efforts to avoid her, she still appeared in front of me. I sighed, keeping on my mask as I nodded to her. Your Majesty, are you taking a walk? Rashta's taking a walk too. Yes, I had no idea where her inexhaustible energy came from. Last time I saw her, we didn't part on the best terms. I came from over there. She pointed her finger at the path she had followed, then smiled brightly and bowed to the prince. Hello, I'm Rashta. I thought the prince would be offended by this unnoble greeting, but he smiled unexpectedly and copied Rashta's mannerism. Hello, I'm Heinleigh. Rashta's giggle was like a silver bell. You're funny, Your Majesty. Who is this? I've never seen him before. Heinleigh introduced himself before I could. I'm Prince Heinleigh from the Western Kingdom. While Prince Rashta covered her mouth with her hands, then squealed in excitement. Rashta has never seen a prince. Haha, is that so? You really look like a prince from a fairy tale book. Goodness, you flatter me, Rashta. A pink flush rose on Rashta's cheeks. Are you two taking a walk together? I asked the Empress to show me around. This place is wonderful, isn't it? There are a lot of places to see. I haven't seen everything, but so far it's been incredible. Unlike the nobles who were embarrassed by Rashta's speech or behavior when they first met her, Prince Heinleigh carried on easily with her. Rashta asked if Prince Heinleigh was feeling comfortable, then posed him another question with a beaming smile. Well, Prince Heinleigh, do you want me to guide you? Prince Heinleigh's eyebrows lifted. Lady Rashta. Rashta has been exploring the entire palace lately. There's no place I don't know. Rashta glanced and added kindly, Her Majesty is busy, so Rashta will do it for you. Thank you, Lady Rashta, but that's all right. The Empress is a great guide. I hadn't even shown him anything yet. Prince Heinleigh glanced at me apologetically. Then Rashta will go with you. It would be more fun if the three of us took a walk together. Rashta attached herself to Prince Heinleigh's side, and he returned a soft smile if he allowed Rashta to accompany us. I would simply leave. I thought through the words that would give me a reasonable excuse. Busy? No, I said I was not busy. I just remembered that I was busy. No, that was too hasty. Perhaps I had to rush to the bathroom. No, absolutely not. In any case, I didn't want to create a scene of the Empress and the Emperor's concubine taking a stroll with the neighboring country's prince. There could be no such ridiculous thing, but before I even choose an excuse, I'm sorry, Lady Rashta. Prince Heinleigh turned down Rashta in a gentle but firm voice. 3 is too many. Rashta looked surprised, and Prince Heinleigh left her with a enjoy your walk, then calmly strode away. He was polite but surprisingly cold. Usually when someone offered their company, the polite thing to do was accept. I glanced sideways at his profile in surprise. Before I knew it, he returned with the prideful attitude when he asked me to guide him. I frowned and thought he certainly had a rude personality. He really was a man that depended on his good looks. Was that the reason of the buzz in the social circles? Prince Heinrich stared at me while I thought I avoided his gaze for fear of being too obvious. When he asked me an unexpected question, "Do you not find me handsome?" what was he talking about? I gave a slight frown and Prince Heinrich continued, "It's strange people are usually interested in me at this point. Why is the Queen so cold? Is my face swollen today?" I made sure to dress finely. I must have heard him wrong. I stared at him. Prince Heinrich suddenly burst out laughing. "Was it a joke? My apologies, Your Majesty, you were so rigid a while ago. The woman from earlier, was she the Emperor's mistress?" Prince Heinrich used the term mistress instead of concubine. This too was not typical of nobility, and it produced a smile from me. "The Emperor is a strange man. How could he look elsewhere with the Queen in front of him? Thank you for your kind words, but there is no need to thank me if he cannot appreciate you. It is his loss." Perhaps that was why he was called a womanizer. For a moment I was pleasantly surprised. I knew his words were meant to be pleasing to my ears, but his haughty face made me unable to accept his flattery. He looked like the type that would be unwilling to give compliments even if he was held by the throat and ordered to do so. I forced a smile, and he gave me a boyish grin in return. "So if you don't mind, Your Majesty, would you invite me to the special banquet on the last day of the New Year's celebrations?" Those present at the final New Year's banquet were highly distinguished guests of high status or made great achievements, or were expected to make great achievements. However, the Emperor and Empress only invited 10 guests. Naturally, most of the invitations were already sent before the New Year's, and Prince Heinrich was naturally the first on that list. "Didn't you already receive the invitation?" "It couldn't be. I received it, but it was an invitation from the Emperor of the Eastern Empire." When he looked at me again, his eyebrows lifted. "I would rather be the Empress' guest. I appreciate it, but I have already sent out all of the invitations. Why don't you cross out the Emperor's name and write down your name below?" He was speaking nonsense, and he chuckled at his own words, then offered up his arm again. "Shall we keep walking?" After our stroll together, I returned to the Western Palace. Countess Eliza was helping me change my clothes when she suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, what's wrong?" Countess Eliza was smiling at the window. I followed her gaze and saw Queen sitting on sill. That was normal. But today his back was towards us. Countess Eliza chuckled. "He flew here, but when he saw you changing he panicked and turned around." "Queen, that bird is so clever, Your Majesty, like a gentleman." When I finished dressing I approached the bird, but Queen still kept his back firmly towards me. He cocked his head when I approached but didn't turn around. I spoke to him in a soft voice. "I'm dressed now." I poked his feathery rear and he spun around and rubbed his forehead against mine. "Did you not look because you were ashamed?" Queen nodded his head primly. He really did look intelligent. "However, did you come here in a hurry today? Why are you tired?" Queen seemed exhausted from his journey when he carried the first note, but after his owner arrived at the palace, he appeared to be more at ease. He looked exhausted again today, however, as if in a rush. Queen fumbled a little, then held out his leg with another note. I petted his head and pulled out the scrap of paper. Looking for me, Queen tilted her head and stared. He then went to drink some water, keeping his eye on me. It was a long moment before I finally replied, looking hard, "And you?" Queen shook the water from his beak, then flew towards me. He looked at the note, then tapped my arm lightly with his wings as if to reprimand me for my lie. He was so adorable the way he reacted to my letters, and I patted his beak again. The New Year's celebrations finally began. Fireworks glittered in the sky at night, and people laughed and chatted in the streets by day. Although I had lived in the palace for a long time, the image that still came to mind when thinking about New Year's was the lively pre-marriage festival. I opened the window, allowing the cool yet moist morning air to tickle my nose. I inhaled and exhaled deeply, then half closed the window and rang the bell next to my bed. After a moment, Countess Eliza entered, dressed more extravagantly than usual. "You will be quite busy today." The Countess smiled at me, then quickly lifted the dress she prepared from the closet. My mother had given the dress to me as a gift, a beautiful thing adorned with white pearls and underlaid with layers of snowy lace to give a full skirt. My mother didn't say it directly to me, but I knew that she was worried about me after the rumors about Rashta. "It's the first day, so we must all dress up. On an event like this one should look colorful. But too strong of a color would look tacky. Instead, it's better to make the Queen's image stand out." She explained to me that concept was the Queen of Snow, then urged me to get up and wash my face. After sliding into the scented bath water and receiving a massage, Countess Eliza washed my hair and placed on light makeup to make my skin look smoother. She helped me put on the white dress, then decorated my hair with more pearls. I slipped on the white shoes, and soon it really was as if I came from a country of snow. You look so beautiful, Empress. I'm not only saying this because you're here. Thank you, Countess Eliza. Countess Eliza seemed to want to speak more, but she smiled silently instead. Perhaps she was about to say something like Soviétch will be impressed when he sees you. I checked the schedule on my desk one final time, then headed towards the Eastern Palace. From the second day onwards it wouldn't matter, but on the first day it was required that the Emperor and Empress enter the first grand banquet together. I found Soviétch waiting for me outside. He smiled at me gently, and extended his arm for me to take. I thought he would be more upset and longing for his lover, but I noticed no such thing in his expression. It was surprising, but I took his arm and we walked towards the grand ballroom. The doors to the hall were wide open. 4 guards, dressed in splendid imperial uniforms than usual, stood on each side of the door, and one rapped on the door. When they saw Soviétch and I, an official sounded the trumpet, and the noise in the hall subsided. I took a few steps with Soviétch at my side, and an enormous staircase stretched downwards from our feet out towards an enormous hall dotted with the colorful outfits of the guests. Soviétch raised his hand and everyone bowed at the same time. I took in the crowd when something I saw made my hands clench involuntarily. Near the center of the ballroom was Rashta, surrounded by foreign nobles. He invited the concubine for the New Year's ball? It wasn't that concubines couldn't attend the celebrations, but when they did they were usually of noble status. It was for this reason that emperors would have a low-status concubine's fake marriage to another noble, raising that concubine's status to countesses or marchionesses. However, Soviétch would never take this blindfold approach with Rashta. Rashta's appearance caught me off guard. I turned my head sideways, but it seemed that I was the only one surprised. Soviétch was smiling at Rashta and nodding his head. When I turned back towards Rashta again, she curtsied shyly and looked up at Soviétch and mouthed, "This is difficult." Soon her gaze fell on me. When our eyes met she smiled and mouthed out, "Sister," then her eyes widened as she covered her mouth in apology. "She's so naive." The expression on his face told me he found Rashta completely endearing. I felt my heart twist. Despite the fact that I was his wife, I felt like a foreign object caught between the two. The nobles who bowed to us were now looking alternately between Soviétch and Rashta. Women covered their mouths with their fans and men whispered to each other behind their gloves. Though they kept their voices low, it was like a roar when all joined in concert. Rashta looked around in surprise and stared up at Soviétch with a frightened face. He sighed, "Empress, can you go down alone?" The two of us already walked in together side by side, and his obligations with me were over. We could go down the stairs separately, but I did not want to give the impression that we were together by force. I made myself speak. "We go down together." Soviétch turned slightly towards me in amazement, but I kept my voice steady. "Many of the top foreign aristocrats are gathered here. They would think there is a rift between us if don't go down together." A conflict between the Emperor and the Empress could be seen as an opportunity for our enemies and the neighboring countries. We don't have to be a perfect couple, but we shouldn't look at each other unfavorably. Soviétch's expression twisted slightly. Yes, I suppose so." Rather than taking to heart what I said, he seemed to accept it as an excuse. He gave a regretful smile and reached out to me. "Then let's go down together." As he escorted me down the stairs, he nodded towards the crowd, and before stopping at a suitable area on the floor he smiled and lowered his arm. "Is this enough?" Yes. With his duty done, Soviétch made towards Rashta. Without looking back, I stood alone and watched him. The foreign nobles surrounding Rashta welcomed the Emperor with a smile and stepped back to make room for him. Rashta quickly nestled herself by Soviétch's side, so that was what a loving partnership looked like. I wrenched my gaze away. Instead of showing pain, I feigned a smile and greeted the Duchess Tania nearby. "You organized the New Year's celebrations, didn't you, Your Majesty? This is wonderful." Duchess Tania approached me with a friendly demeanor, ignoring the topic of Soviétch and Rashta. Before long the other noblewomen and young ladies came to me as well, and we carried on in casual conversation. "Oh, look over there, that's Prince Heinrich. Rumors say that he is a womanizer. He has such a beautiful face. I hear that he mixes with dangerous pirates." Because the noblewomen avoided the topic of Rashta, the conversation turned to Prince Heinrich instead. "Since there are more rumors wherever he goes, he must be seeing someone now, right? What partner would deal with that fire of a person? Prince Heinrich is single. Maybe there isn't one." Well, he is the future king of the Western Kingdom, so it may be beneficial to marry a woman from our Eastern Empire. But he seems quiet for someone who has so many rumors about him. I listened to them talk about the mysterious prince, and took a glass of champagne from a passing servant. It had only a little alcohol, almost like water. I tipped the drink up to my lips. Lifting my head through the glass, I saw the distorted figure of a man. It was Prince Heinle staring in my direction. I lowered my head and pulled the vessel away from my lips. I thought it was by chance that he was looking at me, but when our eyes met, he didn't turn away his gaze. Instead, he lifted his own glass to toast me, then took a drink. He tilted his head, revealing a smooth jawline. A foreign nobleman then caught his attention, and I quickly took my eyes off him. It was then even the most aloof empress cannot help but look at that face. There was a laughing voice from somewhere. My heart pounded, and I turned my head in the direction of the voice. The seats by the wall were occupied with many foreigners and natives. There were too many people for me to know who said it, but I immediately knew who it was. A group of people were holding on to their stomachs as they howled in laughter. It was hard for me to hear, but the person with that voice said something again, and the laughter grew louder. Some of the giggling nobles glanced sideways at me and caught my gaze, and they quickly poked each other in the ribs to signal quiet. Their reaction convinced me of the certainty of my story. They thought I was deaf to what they were saying. But I was not far away. Your Majesty, did you really give her a gift? A lady had been lingering nearby, as if she had been waiting to ask me a question. A gift? My voice came out sharp without me intending it. The lady blushed and apologized, but what I wanted was not an apology. I don't understand what you mean, but I'm not angry. Tell me, what do you mean, a gift? I forced my voice to sound normal, and the lady opened her mouth apprehensively. The foreign guests don't know the rumors about that woman. What they say is that she is the first concubine that the emperor has accepted, and you had given her all kinds of gifts. I already knew the first part, but how did I suddenly give her gifts? Then a foreigner asked me. It's all right, tell me. A foreigner asked that woman if she was all right with being in a love triangle involved with your Majesty, and she said yes. She said that both the emperor and empress loved her greatly. That woman said that immediately after she became a concubine, the empress even sent her all kinds of precious gifts to welcome her. Communication with foreigners was recent. Moreover, most of the other ladies around looked surprised, as if the gossip was not a familiar topic that spread around society. In other words, the foreigners heard the rumors first and spread it to local aristocrats. I felt dizzy and my knees were weak beneath me. People were laughing at me for sending gifts to my husband's lover to gain his attention. The pride that I had mustered swiftly collapsed like a sand castle because of a single false rumor. No matter how much I tried to distance myself from Soviétu and Rashta, I was buried. No, my voice was adamant, but was clear that the rumor was going to spread like wildfire. I clenched the champagne glass and gave my legs strength. My vision swam in front of me. I just wanted to go back to the Western Palace and scream in rage, but I could not reveal even a tremor. Miss Rashta must have misunderstood something. I spoke calmly, and the other ladies chuckled and said, "Is that so?" I didn't know whether they believed me or not. People tended to dismiss the excuses of those hurt by the gossip. I didn't want to get involved as much as possible, but now that it came to this, there was nothing to be done. I would call Rashta myself later and ask. After taking a deep sigh, I handed over the half-full glass to a servant. "Oh, I think the dance is about to start." Duchess Tania gave an exaggerated laugh as she had observed the musicians had stopped, flicking through their sheet music and speaking lowly to each other. There was one rule at the ballroom dance: one could not dance with the same partner twice in a row. The rule allowed one to dance with multiple partners, but the partner for the first dance was considered the most meaningful. The groups began to split up and search for their partners before going to the center. Those who did not want to dance moved to the periphery. Soviétu will have his first dance with Rashta. Since our marriage, Soviétu always had his first dance with me this year. However, I had a good inkling who his partner would be this time. I pretended to look away, but I could see Soviétu taking Rashta's hand and saying something to her. Rashta, happy, glanced at me. The look in her eyes turned to an apology, and Soviétu's head turned this way as well. I looked away before our eyes met, and I kept my chin high as I strode away. The only person who could ask the empress for the first dance was the emperor. No one else would ask me to dance anyway, so I thought it better to leave the area altogether to protect my pride. Duchess Tania, the most popular woman in high society, already had a number of suitors on their knees. I couldn't help myself, but my eyes turned to Rashta and Sovieshu again. Sovieshu was talking to a nearby prime minister. Fortunately, Rashta was now looking closely at Duchess Tania. I'm glad our eyes didn't meet. I didn't want them to notice my gaze. I stuck closer to the wall, hoping that my eyes wouldn't run into them again. However, a buzzing of voices broke out around me before I could reach my intended destination. I looked around. The eyes of the crowd were glued onto the wandering figure of Prince Heinrich. Two young ladies burst into giggles, their cheeks flushed in embarrassment. Many seemed to wonder who the prince would ask for his first dance, and he seemed to bask in the attention. I was still upset by Sovieshu and Rashta, and I didn't have time to give my focus to this prince and his rumors. It didn't matter to me who he danced with. Oh, you were here. Until he came to me, the crowd murmured even more. I took out my fan and looked at him. When our gazes met, Prince Heinrich lowered his eyes and smiled. I went halfway around this room to find you. Prince Heinrich took out a rose tucked across his chest. With the rose in his palm, he fell down on one knee and looked up at me. For a moment I was puzzled by his behavior. I think he's going to ask the empress to dance. Only after hearing someone's startled voice did I realize what was happening. Someone wanted to ask the empress for the first dance? And that someone was Prince Heinrich? My lips parted in surprise. Are you good at dancing, your majesty? Although he knelt like a typical knight, Prince Heinrich's voice was playful. I hesitated for a moment. I was already tangled up in various bad rumors about Rashta and Sovieshu. Perhaps more misunderstandings would sprout if I danced with this womanizer. However, turning down an offer could only be done after several people asked to dance, or after there were already several dances. The only one who asked for the first dance is Prince Heinrich in this situation. If I refused, I would insult him. At least such a situation was considered an insult in high society. There was no other choice. Very well, can you follow me? I accepted the rose he was holding, and Prince Heinrich straightened up and smiled broadly. How confident! If you tread on my foot a few times, I'll ignore it. It won't happen. Don't worry, I'll stay quiet. He chuckled mischievously, then extended his arm. I placed my hand on it, then walked to the center of the dance floor. Sovieshu and Rashta were there as well. Sovieshu raised his eyebrow at Prince Heinrich's presence. In this situation, Sovieshu couldn't ask Rashta, do you often dance good? What do you mean? The way you're looking at me, you didn't pay much attention to me yesterday. I dressed more nicely today. His words were sly. Well, you don't seem to believe it. Did he want me to say that yesterday he was dressed wonderfully enough to make my mouth open? Before I could find my words, the minuet began to flow from the musicians. We dipped briefly and we put our palms together. As we started spinning around to the sound of the violins, the surroundings whirled into view. Duchess Tania, who was acclaimed as the butterfly of society, chose the young and handsome Viscount Landra over numerous other suitors. Duke Liltiang danced with his wife, and Laura danced with her best friend Miss Alishut instead of a man. And Sovieshu danced with. I didn't like this spinning dance. I had to see what I didn't want to see. The moment I sighed, Prince Heinrich swung back close to me, close enough that his lips were near my ear. I know better than anyone else that unnecessary rumors spread easily. I felt like my body was falling again. I looked at him in surprise, and an arrogant smile broadened his face. Do you mean the story of me sending Miss Rashta gifts? He nodded as he approached again. It was surprising for one to talk about the rumors and console me. The sweet music finally came to an end. I stared at him hard for a moment to see if he was making fun of me. But it didn't seem that way. Thank you. I felt ashamed that I believed he was a womanizer, and I was grateful that Prince Heinrich didn't believe the rumors about me at all. I don't believe it either. What, the rumor that you're a womanizer? He unexpectedly burst into laughter, and I turned flustered. Was he saying the rumors were real? I had a blush on my face, and I turned around to hide it. Now that the first dance was over, I wanted to finally go to the edge of the room. Empress, this time with me. Sovieshu wouldn't stay away this time. I placed my hand in his with a small sigh. I knew he was only asking because the rules dictated he couldn't dance with Rashta again, and I was upset to have to accept. However, as I told Sovieshu, we had to set an example with our relationship. Next to him, Rashta was asking Prince Heinrich to dance. My apologies, Lady Rashta, but I am already exhausted. Prince Heinrich smiled and turned away. I cannot dance twice in a row. The handsome man has a surprisingly weak constitution. Then what about after you take a break, when you get your strength back? Then Prince Heinrich suddenly looked over and our eyes met, and his gaze softened. There's someone I want to dance with again. I pondered his repeated refusal towards her. He was determined to cut her off, far different from how most nobles presented themselves. Rashta didn't expect to be rejected, and she touched her hair disconcerted and turned away. Our gazes met, but she didn't acknowledge me and instead turned to Sovieshu with her eyes shimmering with tears. Your Majesty, Rashta has no one to dance with. Take a break. You cannot dance with the same person twice in a row. Rashta was similar to Prince Heinlein. He too had no qualms about expressing his feelings when most nobles would be too proud to voice their thoughts out loud. She whined like a baby, and the surrounding nobles chuckled, not out of mockery but of endearment. Rashta was not noble, and her behavior was rude to say the least, but to everyone else she was like a fresh and pure novelty. Lady Rashta, would you like to dance with me? Several other noblemen approached Rashta, but she weakly replied no thank you, then trudged towards the edge of the room. Sovieshu stiffened, as if he wanted to run towards her. If the music hadn't started at that moment, he might have really gone after her, but he stayed on the floor. Coincidentally, the music was calm and the dance required some distance from one's partner. Sovieshu and I had been dance partners since we were young, and we were used to falling into the rhythm together. As children we held on to each other with laughter, complaining that the steps were awkward. Those days will never come anymore. When I remembered holding a large map and discussing new construction projects, I felt a chill in the corner of my heart. How stupid and naive I was at the time to believe Sovieshu and I would be together for the rest of our lives. When the dance finally brought us close to each other, I still felt like we were far apart. Earlier Sovieshu spoke in a low voice. What did you talk about with Prince Heinlein? We had a normal conversation. Have you heard the rumors about him? What did he mean by that? I didn't say anything for a while to focus on the complicated steps, but I didn't miss the crease between Sovieshu's eyebrows. What do you mean you had a normal conversation with him? He was very entertaining. He's a womanizer, so of course he's entertaining people like funny men. The distance between us grew apart again. As I turned around, I saw Prince Heinlein standing near a table, and watching me he smiled and waved one hand when our eyes met. I have Rashta as my concubine, so I won't tell you that you cannot take another man as your lover as well. Still, I don't believe it should be Prince Heinlein. I don't know what you're talking about. If you are with Prince Heinlein, he will not be your concubine, but you will be his. Wouldn't that be disgraceful to the Empress of the Eastern Empire? I don't know what you're imagining, but Prince Heinlein and I don't have that kind of relationship. Good, don't be the match for the fire that spreads everywhere. He is. And I was about to protest that Prince Heinlein wasn't like that, when Sovieshu suddenly came to a halt. The music hadn't stopped yet. Sovieshu was frozen on the floor, and I couldn't dance alone, and stopped as well, jamming the traffic around us. Your Majesty, what was the matter? I wondered if he sprained a foot, but Sovieshu strode away. The people around me looked on with puzzled expressions. Sovieshu finally stopped in front of Rashta. She was standing against the wall crying. Rashta, why are you crying? Sovieshu looked at her in surprise, and Rashta stretched out her arms and hugged him around the neck. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. I could feel the noble's eyes on me. Sovieshu and I were dancing together before he threw me away and went to Rashta. My jaw clenched. I felt blood drain from my head as my vision turned spotty. Rashta kept crying while Sovieshu tried to comfort her, and eventually her picked her up and they left. Oh my God, so it's true that the Emperor loves the concubine? Yes. As the two of them left, the gaze of the crowd pressed down harder on me. But I heard she was a runaway slave. Is that true? What really nonsense. The Emperor just said it was a rumor. Watch your mouth. His Majesty said he would punish anyone that spoke of it. No, wait a minute. Does the Eastern Empire allow runaway slaves to become concubines? This is not possible in our northern kingdom. I even brought her the sea jewels of the northern kingdom as a gift. I'm sure the Emperor did nothing of the sort. The music stopped, and everyone was either looking at me or talking about Rashta. I wanted nothing more than to flee the room, but I forced myself to walk calmly away. I had no idea where I was going, but I heard someone following my footsteps and glimpsed Prince Heinlein's reflection on a smooth pillar. I did not feel like being civil and talking to a foreign prince for now. I just wanted to sit somewhere. I found myself walking through an empty palace corridor. Sir Artina, the deputy commander of the knights, fell into step beside me. Are you all right, Your Highness? I'm fine. You should get some rest. You look pale. I nodded. I went to my chambers, passing the drawing room before going into the bedroom. I fell face down on the bed, hugging the pillow and curling up on myself. My whole body felt unbearably heavy. How much was I carrying on my shoulders? There was a tap on glass and I saw a queen sitting by the window. I opened it wearily and Queen entered. Blinking his large eyes, I took the bird into my arms as his heat spread from his warm little body into mine. Tears burst out of my eyes. How could this creature provide such great comfort? I soaked in the warmth Queen gave me like a person abandoned in a bitter winter. By the time I was finally calm, I realized I had been hugging the bird for too long. He was probably annoyed. I looked up and to my surprise Queen was simply peering at me. Thank you. You always give me strength. I was embarrassed to say it out loud and whispered it in his ear, and Queen covered his face with his wings. Sometimes you're like a real person. Queen's eyes widened and he darted around the room, and there was a commotion outside. The paper hanging above the bed fluttered and I pulled him towards me. I rang the bell to signal my permission for them to come in, and the main door opened and voices came inside. I went into the drawing room with Queen in my arms, finding several ladies in waiting there, including Countess Eliza and Laura. They had come straight from the party and were dressed more splendidly than usual. However, the clock showed that the end of the ball itself was some time away. Why were they here? Countess, what's going on? What's the best part of your day so far? Did the video add to it? How did you like today's video? We appreciate you watching. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and don't forget to ring the bell for notifications.